Welcome everybody to a session we're having today about simplify your virtual infrastructure with Dell EMC VxRail. My name is Mike Orth. I work in Dell Technologies in the Customer Solutions Center, and I'm delighted to begin to talk about this session today. So I've broken out my kind of agenda to talk about a couple of different areas, but the first area we're going to start with around VxRail is kind of what is VxRail, right? So I've been working on this product with Dell Technologies and our customers since around 2016. To be honest, I can't believe I'm working on this for over 5 years. When it first came out, hyper-converged was very new. A lot of our customers had never heard of this type of technology before. They were more traditional infrastructure, separate compute, separate storage, separate networking. But what was coming on stream at the time was public cloud offerings, right? A lot of our customers had to make a decision. Were they going to continue to feed, water, maintain their own infrastructure in that traditional managed way where they might need an expert in storage, an expert in compute, and an expert in networking? Or could they, offload everything to a service provider or a public cloud offering and just consume it? So enter hyper-converged, which is a way to leverage a single appliance that takes care of the storage, the networking, and the compute all in one device. And ideally, it makes it really simple to manage and use. Now, at the time, it was very disruptive technology, HCI, but it was predicted that it would be a huge growth area. So I jumped on board this, and true enough, over the last couple of years, our solution, which is based around the VxRail appliance, has really taken off. A lot of customers are loving it, and they're coming back even over time and investing again into more of it. So it's a huge area of growth for our business. It's not the only thing we do. We still sell traditional infrastructures, but a lot of customers are very happy with how HCI, hyper-converged infrastructure, simplifies their day-to-day. And now we've been able to prove that it can be used for lots of different use cases. Whereas when it started out, maybe it was for development workloads, but not for production. It might have been a great use case for VDI, but nobody saw it being used anywhere else. That is not true anymore. Literally, VxRail is being used by customers all across their environments for various different types of workloads. And if we size it correctly and design it correctly, there is really nothing that doesn't make sense for VxRail to be used. Everything from edge, core, all the way to hybrid cloud environments as well. So it's pretty exciting. It's pretty interesting. The main benefits of going with hyper-converged and our VxRail platform is really around how simple and easy it is to use, how agile it is, and that's really in comparison to what public cloud offerings are doing, right? Once customers leverage any sort of public cloud offering at all, for example, if they were going to use Microsoft Office, for example, Office 365, that's the expectation they have, of being able to access their environment all the time very easily with not a huge amount of management they need to do anymore. They don't have to manage, for example, an email server to deploy it and configure it, and to have somebody employed just for managing that system. They can just consume it and get on with the rest of their business. So that's what we're doing with VxRail, the VxRail platform for their infrastructure. We're making it very simple for them to be able to consume it and use it and maintain it and deploy it. But also, when the business needs change, they need to be able to change with it, right? So their infrastructure needs to be very agile. It can change to different deployment types, different sizes, different capacities. It needs to be able to scale very easily. So all of that is very achievable with the VxRail. You can start very small and you can scale up or out very easily, right? We'll talk a little bit about that later on. So one slide that kind of brings HCI really up to speed, just in case anybody in the audience hasn't looked into this yet. When we're talking about using hyper-converged infrastructure and using our VxRail appliance, we're talking about a fundamental difference between maybe a traditional architecture where we have separate compute and separate storage and separate networking. With HCI and with VxRail, we're building out a single cluster. Now, it could be there's lots of different options for sizes, all the way up to a 64 node cluster, 64 nodes in a single cluster. So it's very, very huge. Most of our customers, 8 nodes and less. A typical deployment is starting with 3 or 4 nodes, but we even have smaller deployment sizes. We'll talk about that a little bit later. We have 2 node and even a single node coming out. But typically 3 or 4 nodes is your typical HCI starting point. And this is kind of a industry standard trend as well. When we look at what we're doing, we're forming a single cluster of those nodes, right? So each of these nodes in this image is a VxRail appliance in itself, but they're joined together across that fast network to form a cluster of nodes. And for this, we're leveraging the vSAN software to create the storage that customers are leveraging, right? So it's a software-defined storage element made up of all of the disks in each of the individual nodes that make up the cluster. So each of our VxRail nodes is providing local disk, and the vSAN software is joining them together in one single software-defined storage pool within vSphere, right? So when you're going to look for your storage in vSphere, you will see a single data store made up of however many nodes and however many disks are in those nodes. Doesn't matter if it's 4 nodes or 64 nodes, it'll still be a single vSAN data store, right? So it's very simple to manage. And under the hood, vSAN is providing a lot of the storage services that you used to rely upon a separate physical storage array to provide. All of that is done in vSphere now. Now, in this picture, these are 1U appliances, but we have a full portfolio. We have single chassis that have very, very dense 4 nodes in a 2U appliance, all the way up to very large 2U appliances, rack servers that have, multiple CPUs in them, right? So we can have up to 4 CPUs in a single node. But we also have single socket nodes, dual socket. So you can really custom configure the size of your nodes to meet the workload that you're trying to deploy on top of the VxRail. This is very important. Customers, want it to be simple, but they don't want it to be so simple that they don't have any choice for their workloads. They have to buy a small, a medium, or a large platform. They want to really customize it to meet the workloads that they're running today. So we can achieve that very easily by setting up from our portfolio a specific node type and size that matches your needs. Lots of choice around the type of disk, from SATA and SAS to NVMe technologies. And this is always, coming on with newer technologies, and we're bringing it into the portfolio for customers to leverage. But you still have lots of choice for different types of workloads that require it. We can also have a lot of flexibility around the networking area. So we can either leverage Dell Technologies networking switching for this VxRail cluster, or customers can deploy VxRail into their existing modern networks that they may have already recently made investment in. Typically 10 gig is the standard for HCI, but any customers that are investing today are probably looking at 25 gig networking. VxRail is very flexible. It can use 1, 10, and 25 gig. So customers have a lot of choice in this area. Again, they're not being forced into a network investment that they don't want to make necessarily. But it makes a lot of sense when you're deploying VxRail and HCI to maybe have a modern, fast network there, because that is where your vSAN, your storage is running across that network. It requires that to be very solid. What comes with VxRail? What's inside it? We have the HCI software the HCI system software that's included with the VxRail appliance. Only customers that have an investment in the VxRail appliance will get the advantage of the VxRail Manager, for example. This is a piece of software that looks after automating the deployment, making it simple and easy to deploy with a wizard-driven kind of environment, as well as after it's been deployed, how do you keep it up and running, which is very important for customers. We're going to look at lifecycle management a bit later and how the VxRail Manager HCI system software handles that for our customers. There's choices around the type of vSAN license that you use with VxRail, so you're not having to buy all of the features if you're not needing them. For example, if you want to have a stretch cluster, you're going to have maybe an enterprise license. But if you're just leveraging a single cluster, not across multiple sites, not stretching it across multiple locations, then a standard license for vSAN is fine. We include a license for vCenter Server as well when we're selling you the VxRail appliance, which is a great option for customers. If you're going to deploy a new greenfield environment, you can actually have a new vCenter deployed as part of that day zero automated deployment. But it's flexible. If you have an existing vCenter in place and you're already licensing it, well, then you can also deploy VxRail directly into that. VxRail is also vSphere ready. So if you have licenses for ESX, for example, that you want to bring to your VxRail deployment, you can do that. If you're replacing an old traditional infrastructure that has maybe some old ESX hosts in it and it has some licensing, you potentially can bring those licenses into the VxRail and consume them. So there can be some savings there, migrating off the old and into the new environment. All of our VxRail appliances are part of our portfolio for VCF, VMware Cloud Foundation. So they are a great delivery mechanism for leveraging vRealize and the automation that VMware brings with their software-defined data center, right? We also have customers that are interested in not just in virtualization, but in containers and Kubernetes. So VMware's Tanzu is very deeply integrated into this solution, and we can maybe talk about that a little bit later. For data protection, VxRail is really a VMware appliance, right? It's an appliance for vSAN, it's an appliance for VMware. So if you have an existing investment in data protection that you're leveraging with your VMware estate, you're going to be able to use it with VxRail. It's not going to be a problem. We also, include the ability to bundle in a bit of software called Recover Point for VMs, which is like a Sky Plus for VMs. The VMs that are protected can be rolled back to any point in time. So it's a continuous protection. Very interesting. It's worth looking into, how we enable customers to leverage this. It's typically more than what they're already doing for protecting their workload. So it could be very, very interesting add-on that is bundled with VxRail as well. So what trends do we see into the future? I've been doing this for about 5 years. Right now, I think customers are continuing to modernize their data center, but sometimes they're consolidating those data centers, and yet still there's data to be gathered everywhere. So we talk about the edge and where customers are needing to be able to bring data center technologies closer to where the data is being generated. And a lot of times that's not back at the main central location. It could be spread out across many different locations in many different areas. So that becomes another problem to have to try and manage those disparate locations. So our edge deployment strategy with VxRail is to make everything easy to manage from either a single point in the main data center where customers can leverage that same type of deployment and automated lifecycle management to make day-to-day easier, right? Customers are also looking at adopting a hybrid cloud strategy. So like I said, they may be investing in public cloud already with something like Office 365, but they're looking to see what other services they might be able to leverage in a consume it sort of way, right? So having the ability to leverage cloud services, but also when it makes sense, have their infrastructure managed in a similar to public cloud-like way. And that is really where the automation and capability that VxRail brings to the party makes the environment that they're managing in their data center, very similar to the experience of leveraging public cloud, but it's much more affordable and more secure to have it in their location rather than out in an external public cloud situation. So a lot of customers are very interested in having freedom and flexibility with that hybrid cloud adoption for their models. Now, also cloud native, as I mentioned, is coming on stream. Not everybody is moving towards this just yet, but it's good to know that making an investment in VxRail means you're already ready. If it's just virtualization you're looking at today and containers isn't really something that you've adopted yet, that's fine. A year ago, a lot of our customers were kind of no hands went up when you asked them about their interest in containers. That has changed over the last 6 months. And I think it's because for some vendors that are selling applications out there, it makes a lot of sense to deploy them in VMs, and for other applications, it makes sense to deploy it in containers. So I think both will be around for a while. What we really need is our infrastructure engineers to be comfortable with managing both. And I think that's where VxRail is making it really simple to be able to retrain our infrastructure engineers to do software-defined and HCI, as well as cloud-native support as well. So some of the things that have changed over the last year, which is quite interesting, is that we've adopted the ability for our customers to do their own installations of our VxRail, right? In the past, it was a simplified, automated deployment, but it was all done by a services person, right? Or maybe a partner. It was wizard driven. Yes, we know that experience was very simple and easy to use. We used to demonstrate this for customers, but it was still not something they were doing. Now we have a new ability for customers to be able to self-deploy their VxRail. So the same capability that would be happening if it was a services person doing it, we're giving customers access to a portal that allows them to pre-plan what their deployment should look like, and then build out a project for that cluster, which they can then follow step by step in a guided way. There's basically still a deployment wizard as part of this, but it doesn't take a huge amount of training for a customer to be able to do this. So that's why we enabled our customers to be able to do their own deployments. So the wizard and the configuration portal looks a little bit like this. Lots of guides, lots of links to training videos. Customers wanted this flexibility. Now, some still don't want to. A vast majority of our VxRail customers are happy to have somebody else do the deployment. But there are times when you're deploying, maybe multiple clusters and many clusters, especially across many sites and edge locations. Financially, it might make sense. If I learn it once, I can do it myself, right? So we've enabled that for our customers now. Very, very important. So while we're talking about edge locations, let's take a look quickly at the VxRail satellite nodes option. So in the past, 3 or 4 node clusters was a typical starting point. But when we're talking about edge locations and remote offices, a lot of customers don't need that many nodes at that location. So we do have a 2-node option, which is quite good, still leveraging vSAN. But with satellite nodes, we can actually do single nodes. So it can get down to very, very low cost, extending the VxRail technology out to that edge, making it a similar experience to manage, but having a very, very small footprint. So this is really interesting. We have a couple of different models of nodes that support this. And at the heart of it, it's not running vSAN, right? It's running a RAID protection. So customers have a lot of flexibility in how they protect data using that single node option, but it has a much smaller footprint than before for our edge offering. So it's quite interesting. You still need to have a main site that's leveraging the VxRail. So think about that as being kind of the central location for management, and then the edge locations all connect back to that. So it gives a simple single point of management and single pane of glass for managing all those different edge locations. And some customers have a huge amount of remote edge locations that they need to manage, and this is quite a challenge for them to be able to maintain consistency off them, make it very simple to manage. Rather than having local resources needing to manage each of those sites, it can all be pulled back into one main location. It's quite interesting. Each of those locations not requiring its own separate management pane. It can all be done from that one location, and still have different flexible sizes and capacities at each of those locations as well. So the satellite nodes is proving to be very popular and interesting for customers. I think we'll start to see a lot more of that into next year as well. So I'm going to move on because want to make sure I get to cover everything. Another option is around, again, scalability. So in the past, we always had the option from our customers to scale out a node at a time for vSAN and VxRail. Now we have the option with VxRail dynamic nodes to have a compute-only node that has no vSAN on it, be able to connect back to our existing VxRail vSAN cluster and consume the storage from there. So we talked about HCI, bringing everything into one, but we still have customers who have workloads where it makes more sense to have a separate compute to the storage element. So that's where kind of dynamic nodes comes into play, giving those customers that flexibility that they're looking for. So they can scale that compute independent. They can have a different compute footprint in terms of CPU to what they're running in the VxRail vSAN cluster. That could be very important. It has an effect on the licensing and the technology that they're using in that area. So it gives them a tremendous amount of flexibility. Let me see this here now. We're able to kind of build this out. We're able to leverage the dynamic nodes for connecting back to vSAN and VxRail, but we could also leverage it to connect back to external storage using some of our storage arrays, maybe as secondary storage, right? Using a HBA. So yeah, traditionally we were able to scale out a node at a time, and if we wanted to scale out our VxRail cluster, our vSAN cluster with more storage, we used to you have the ability to add disks into empty disk slots in the nodes, which is important. But now being able to scale the compute separately to the storage makes the flexibility of choice for customers, whether they want to use HCI or they want to leverage a disaggregated footprint where they have separate compute to their separate vSAN storage. That's very interesting. You can see with what I'm trying to depict here in the HCI mesh slide is that with vSphere 7, VMware unlocked this capability called HCI mesh, which means I don't necessarily now have different islands of storage, right? In the center, I could have a VxRail vSAN cluster. Maybe I'm leveraging some enterprise features there. Maybe leveraging an all-flash cluster. Maybe leveraging deduplication and compression services in that cluster. But I've got another cluster where my workloads don't necessarily need that. Maybe this might be a dev test environment. I don't need as much capacity, maybe. Or maybe I don't need as much performance. I want a different node type. But if I'm running out of storage in either of these two clusters, does that mean I necessarily want to scale them? Or is it a temporary thing where I want to be able to map over to the other cluster or even move workloads between them as they promote from one type of workload development to production or back again, right? A lot of flexibility by leveraging the same network between the clusters. I can mount the data store from one cluster to another to be able to consume it. So just using a policy in vSAN, I can decide where the workload that I'm deploying lands, either in the first cluster on the left or the second cluster in the middle. And then, of course, with the dynamic nodes, the compute nodes, the flexibility extends even further because I can mount either of those two clusters up to 5 different clusters from my dynamic compute node cluster, which is only going to be compute only, doesn't need a vSAN license. It can connect across that HCI mesh network with the vSAN network and consume those different data stores, right? Very, very powerful, a lot of flexibility. Customers very interested in being able to leverage this. We also, have that ability of, again, connecting back to our storage arrays like PowerStore and Unity and PowerMax from those dynamic nodes, still getting the benefit of that simplified lifecycle management and deployment, that automated deployment that we're talking about. So a consistency across that infrastructure layer, that is what the VxRail vSAN nodes are bringing, as well as the dynamic compute only nodes. Very, very interesting. There's a couple of different form factors for this. So again, you can build the nodes to suit your needs. And there's lots of different use cases for customers to be able to kind of use this software. In terms of lifecycle management, we've always had a great story here. Our customers are saying they don't really have time to keep up with all the patching and updating and security updates that are required these days. And that's where they're trying to make that decision. Do we continue to manage our own hardware, or do we move it to someone else? We need something simpler, or we just can't do it. So that's where VxRail's lifecycle management capability really kind of shines. Everything that's being patched and updated is done via one simple bundle file. Roughly once a month, an update bundle comes out. It's given from the Dell Technologies portal. VxRail can be set up to pull down automatically that bundle update. You just choose when you want it to be deployed. It's a non-disruptive upgrade, so it can happen at any time, and it can be scheduled as well. So doesn't matter whether it's a BIOS update, a firmware update, a physical network card that needs to be patched, or a security patch or a bug fix. It's the same method. It's the same experience. Single bundle file applied to the cluster. And it's very easy to do. And it's quite quick and non-disruptive. But also customers get to pick and choose when they upgrade. For a lot of customers, they don't necessarily want to go to the latest software, and they want to be able to, maybe because of a particular application that a vendor requires runs on a certain version, they can pick and choose when they upgrade. So we maintain multiple code streams for our VxRail customers, right? This is very important. They can stay on that older version of vSphere or ESX or vSAN and still get security patches and bug fixes, which is very important, right? Still that same method with that simple single bundle file, but then they can choose when they upgrade. In the back end, we're looking after all of the different BIOS firmware updates to make sure the drivers, etc., operate together. No other vendor in the HCI space is doing this because they don't own all of the hardware in the total solution, right? They may own the software on top, but for us, we're in control of all of these elements because we're the only one providing the VxRail solution, the VxRail appliance. So we're working together, Badge, Dell, and VMware people, on the roadmap for what's coming down the road in terms of hardware and software, and behind the scenes, very quickly integrating and testing these new patches and updates and security fixes so that there's no impact for our customers to be able to just consume them, right? Rather than having to deploy the latest software and then run it through a customer's test environment before it promotes to production, we want to do that hard work ourselves behind the scenes in our engineering labs. So hours and hours of testing go into each of these releases for our customers. We're basically providing that essentially as a service, right? So I had a couple other areas I wanted to talk about quickly. VMware Tanzu on VxRail. So it's really simple. Right there in vSphere, you can turn on workload management, and within 15 minutes, you could have a new container environment set up running Kubernetes. And you could now, as an infrastructure person, you might not necessarily know how exactly to set up Kubernetes, but you can consume Kubernetes like a resource group right there within your infrastructure. You're probably already familiar with resource groups in vSphere, so that's how this works. You deploy a new resource group and you allow access to your developers to consume that. Your developers will be able to connect very quickly, and they'll be very familiar with the same tools they're used to using in other Kubernetes environments, so they can get up to speed quite quickly in carving out their containers right there on top of vSphere. So the infrastructure and the developer can really work well together, but doing the jobs that they're used to doing from the interfaces that they're used to doing, right? So it's a really exciting kind of area. It's not for all of our customers yet, but many of our customers are starting to look into this space, and this is really a peace of mind to know that the investment in VxRail is kind of future-proofing them for when their business requires them to have VMs and containers or just containers in their environment. Quickly, Smart Fabric services for VxRail. We've had this for a while. Right there inside of vSphere, we can manage all of our switching. If we decide to bundle the Dell switching together, we can turn this on, and the vSphere admin now can manage the storage, they can manage the virtualization, they can manage the containers, and they can manage the networking for their environment. This makes it really, really simple for a lot of customers. What we were trying to do, right, make the whole thing a single appliance. So it's quite interesting. Might want to check out a kind of a deeper demo of that. So kind of lastly, I want to say thanks. I work in the Customer Solution Center here in Limerick in Ireland. And if you have any more questions or you want to see kind of a demo environment or run a POC or something like that, reach out to the Define Tomorrow team, and they can talk to us or work with us on scheduling a kind of a session. Just have a link there to what our the Customer Solution Center is all about. So thanks very much. Talk to you again.